Hello and Hare Krishna. Welcome back to the ATMA Paradigm, consciousness-based science. Basically, it's a look at modern science from the perspective of Krishna consciousness. As we explained last week, and I'll just give you a quick recap, the ATMA Paradigm seeks to look at the big questions of our existence: consciousness, matter, life, and the universe. And what we're proposing is that science is expert at looking at certain elements of each of those topics, but there are boundaries to the scientific method beyond which science can never cross, not because it's a matter of technology or know-how, but because they are dealing with topics that are beyond the scientific purview. And really we're in the realms of philosophy. And what we need in order to be able to unite science with these areas of our experience that are beyond science, or at least beyond the scientific method, is a philosophical framework that encompasses the whole of our reality. So that is what we're proposing within the ATMA paradigm, an alternative philosophical framework based on the insights of Vedic wisdom, but which is consistent with scientific evidence. And also that it is part of a greater ontological picture and supportive of the proposition of theology. Now, as a way of introduction, I just want to mention that on the website, on the Facebook website, where there is the information about the course, we have the slides from last week, and the slides for this week will be available afterwards. Plus, there are also reading notes. So if you're trying to follow this and really wanting to explore it deeply, you can go to the site, and straight after this one there'll be the reading notes ready for next week's topic. And in that way you can think about some of the issues and prepare yourself. I'm wondering how many of you were able to do it for this particular session. Now, last week we had a little bit of a glitch at the end. We didn't get to do a proper questions and answer session. And there were several very good questions that really needed and were worth looking at. So I'm going to very quickly give some response to them now before we get into today's topic. First question was, we were discussing physicalism as a philosophy that says that the only thing that exists is matter, and physical matter at that. So the question was, are all scientists physicalists? The answer is no, they're not. There are many that actually believe that their science does not encompass all of reality, and would be very happy if there was a way of broadening out what science could explore, or if that it would allow in discussions on scientists, on philosophy. So we don't attack scientists, but we do challenge that currently science is under the sway of one particular philosophical dogma, physicalism. And physicalism is the only way that science allows itself to interpret its data and evidence. And that's causing it problems. And we want to see science freed from any dogma and available to be interpreted with a much more comprehensive and broader philosophical framework. We talked a lot about aspects of chance, randomness, and that we said were non-scientific principles because they couldn't be proved within the laboratory. But someone has asked, reasonably, given enough time, why wouldn't the results that we see be caused by or be responsible for by chance? Now, of course you can believe in chance if you want to, but it is a question of belief. What we're suggesting is that you cannot use arguments of chance in order to say this is a scientific explanation. It is not a scientific explanation. There's no explanation whatsoever, and certainly shouldn't be used in the name of science. Chance in philosophical terms is very, very complex. And you can read up the debates on this, that it's highly questioned whether chance really exists, and certainly not in the common way that we bandy it around. And When we get to specific examples dealing with later on in consciousness and life and so on, we'll actually look at the specific way chance or randomness is invoked and show why it is not appropriate at all. A third question, a little similar, was but on the specifics of the universe. How are physicists currently arguing the existence of the nothing that the universe is supposed to ultimately come from? Now, we will be looking at this particular topic in great detail much later in the course. But for now, I'm just going to note that the idea that the universe appears out of nothing is certainly being debated amongst many astrophysicists. And the Big Bang idea itself is being revised. Part of the issue is that we seem to have a lot of information right at the beginning of the universe, which is responsible for what they call the fine-tuning of the various constants which affect how the universe then manifests. So there are many kind of new ideas, and I'm not going to get into them now, I'll just mention them by name. The multiverse, the idea that the universe tries infinitely number of times to get going, and one of them was the one that we're in. Or there's ideas, instead of a big bang, you have a big bounce. That means that a previous universe is collapsing and then rebounding into this one. And I spent an evening with Roger Penrose. We were having pizza together, where he described his cyclical universe, which again is another way of trying to deal with it. But we'll come to that, those topics in much greater detail when we're dealing with the section on the universe. There was a fourth question about interpretivism as a scientific paradigm. What do we think of it? Now, interpretivism is linked with another idea of positivism. Now, these are epistemological theories, meaning that they are to do with our ability to learn and to know stuff. So they're not really trying to explain the universe in a complete way. They're trying to just question, how do we get to know things? Positivism suggests an objective world, i.e. a world that is out there and it is possible to then know it as it is. But interpretivism says that no, we can only know the universe, through our subjective experience of it, and we're always going to interpret it according to how we see things or believe stuff and so on. And actually both are right. We would suggest there's a real world out there, but that we subjectively interpreted it. So this is an interesting thing. It's this topic of positivism and interpretivism really starts to question, what can we know for certain? How can we be really sure of anything? And I think that provides a certain segue into today's presentation. Today we are looking at we're a part of this part 1 of the course, which is on consciousness, and today's lecture 1-2 is what is consciousness? So let's explore this big question, what is consciousness? Here's one definition: a mystery in our faces at every moment. This is Professor Neil Seth, who's at the University of Sussex, probably one of the main neuroscientists, researchers in this country. A mystery in our faces. We don't understand it, yet it is there with us at every moment. Here's another one that I like: consciousness. That annoying time between naps. Now, that doesn't tell us what consciousness is, but it does tell us how it kind of appears to us, how it manifests in our life. All day long we hear the thoughts in our head, ideas, desires, hopes and plans, but we also have worries and illusions and anxieties and fears, and all these are fighting for our attention. And when we're wrapped up in these thoughts, they dictate our emotions, and that's also part of our conscious experience. A roller coaster of ups and downs throughout our day. And we're affected by these thoughts and emotions in such a way that we can't even deal with the ideas that are coming up in our thoughts. And as we say in Ireland, we just feel, give my head some peace. So consciousness, that annoying time between naps, it's that thing that bothers us from the moment we are fully awake and aware of things to when we fall asleep. And consciousness really is the only thing we're concerned about. This isn't just armchair philosophy. The only thing that we worry about all day long is how our consciousness is doing. And also, because we're nice, we worry about how others are doing with their consciousness. All our desires are for the benefit of nice conscious experience. All our worries about the detriment to our conscious feelings. So when we go to the doctor, we do so not because our body is a problem, but because I consciously feel pain or worry about the state of my body. So doctors are really treating consciousness, not the body. And of course, doctors are only concerned for the body as long as there is a conscious person experiencing life within it. So really, nothing is more important than consciousness for us to think about, to understand, and to explore. Now, in trying to explore it, amongst philosophers, neuroscientists, and other scientists, at the moment, we haven't got any singly accepted definition. We've got folk definitions, as Anil Seth says. We've got lots of ways that people talk about it, but nothing that is accepted in either philosophy or science. We have a whole range of terms and concepts, and people use them in different ways to mean different things to themselves. And it's therefore very hard to even create a good discourse and debate on many of the topics because we keep changing how we refer to various things. There's a range of interpretations of what we're trying to explore when we mean consciousness. So overall, it's considered to be complex and still not understood. So where do we start? What can we know for certain? Well, I'd like to throw in one very profound question to you at this stage. It goes like this. Do you exist? Now, we could do one of our little polls to see if each of you out there does exist. But even if you're thinking about this, it kind of means you do exist. Because who is the you that is thinking about this question before you answer? You know, there's even a particular syndrome called Cotard's syndrome, where the individual feels that they don't exist. In fact, they feel that they may be dead. And it's a really frightening, nasty condition. But even when they are claiming that they don't exist, there is someone who is experiencing that feeling that I don't exist. So even in that state, there is existence. And some people claim that the self is an illusion, that ultimately they don't exist. Now, there is, people who deny the spirit or the self, and this is particularly prevalent with those who may have explored some Buddhist philosophies. I get people who say, no, the self doesn't exist. Maybe you believe that ultimately you are trying to dissolve yourself and annihilate that aspect. But you've got to admit, for the moment, you think you are the you that exists and needs to do something about the self that you believe in. So even in that case, the individual would have to answer yes, that they exist, or they believe that they exist at this point. Now, I start our conversation on consciousness like this because it follows how Srila Prabhupada does. There is one brilliant purport that Prabhupada gives to the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 35, and it'll be highlighted in a little bit. And Prabhupada starts with this very point. How do we know we exist? That is something that is common to everyone. That is our certainty. That is our starting point. And I'd like to explore it using the little help from the BBC website. It did some philosophical little clips, and this is one they did on René Descartes, and it's voiced by Stephen Fry.
What am I? A thinking thing. That's what René Descartes believed. But how did he get there? Descartes asked, what, if anything, can I know for certain? He decided he couldn't rely on any evidence acquired from his senses, since they sometimes misled him. A straight stick can look bent in water. In the past, he'd mistaken the shape of objects in the distance, and so on. Worse still, whilst sleeping, he sometimes dreamt he'd woken up. So how then could he be sure he wasn't dreaming now? But hang on, surely 2 plus 3 equals 5, even in a dream. Descartes, a mathematician, wouldn't get that wrong, would he? Even here, Descartes realized he couldn't claim absolute certainty. For what if an evil demon was in control of his thoughts, manipulating them so that every time he added numbers together, he made a basic error? Where would that leave him? There would be nothing he could be sure of, just a whirlpool of doubt. Descartes' lifebelt was the realization that even if such a demon existed, it couldn't deceive him about his own existence. Every thought, no matter how unreliable, proved he existed as a thinking thing. He could be more sure of that even than that he had a body. This is his famous cogito argument. I think, therefore I am. Cogito, ergo sum.
So Descartes explored this in his own way. And what he came up with is that our senses fool us. We make mistakes when we try and interpret things we see or hear. Our mind plays tricks on us, and we misinterpret things we see and hear. So what can we ever know for certain? And his conclusion was this point, that I am the thinking thing. Now, some people say we are fooled into thinking we exist, but who is the person? Who is that thing that is fooled? And really taking this analysis, we can see that it takes a real person, a person that exists, to be fooled by an illusion. And it also takes a real illusion to fool a person. So this is just a useful way. There's a lot about the rest of Descartes' ideas and theories we can put aside. But this particular aspect of cogito ergo sum, and that's how it should be pronounced if you're ever quoting it to a Latin scholar, that I think, therefore I am. At least that point is a nice starting point. That's the one thing that we can know for certain. The conclusion that we exist. And as I said, Srila Prabhupada uses that in this purport of 2.2.35 in the Bhagavatam. And actually, Prabhupada in that purport takes us through a series of arguments. And they're actually drawn from Jiva Goswami's writings. 4 key points that establish the nature of conscious experience in relationship to the body. And these are often described in philosophy as the kind of intuitive aspects of what we know to be true about ourselves. And they're really important. And so let's start to explore these things. So, we exist, but how do you know that you exist? What convinces you you're alive? Is it because you experience stuff? Sights, sounds, tastes, feelings, thoughts? So there's something very special about the experience, the phenomenon of experience that helps us to appreciate that we are sentient, conscious beings. Now, let's draw on your acting skills. You're on your own, so you can do this and no one's watching. We're going to explore one of the thought experiments that are often discussed in consciousness literature. It's about being zombies. So I want you to imagine you're a zombie. That means you're insentient. You have no thoughts, no feelings going through your mind. You simply act out things in a very mechanical, machine-like way. Something comes into the purview of your sensors and you just respond. Okay? So think of yourself like that for a moment. Hard because you are a conscious being, but try. Now imagine the virus or whatever was causing you to be a zombie has been cured. Now you are filled with consciousness. You are now a sentient being, aware of what it feels like to experience your actions and your perceptions. Act it out. Explore what it might be to look at your hands for the first time and go, oh, or to hear a sound. Not just as a stimulus, but actually as a sound. So the zombie idea is actually part of a thought experiment called the conceivability argument. You'll see it in all the literatures. It's not one of my favorites, but it is very popular amongst those who are trying to present the difference between being conscious and not being conscious. And the idea is to imagine that a zombie is identical to yourself, molecule by molecule. Everything is identical except that it doesn't have consciousness. And one of the questions asked is, so does our ability to conceive of such an entity that is biologically identical to us but doesn't have consciousness mean that there must be something different about the property of consciousness separate from the biological form? Another way that it's sometimes phrased is, well, if God created a zombie, would he have to do any extra work to give it consciousness? Now, as I said, I'm not overconfident in those particular arguments, and I'm not trying to propose them for you. But I mention them from completeness, and the point is that our conviction about ourselves and that we exist as conscious beings rests on our ability to perceive and experience stuff. And that takes us to the first of Jiva Goswami's propositions, that I exist as a conscious entity because I see, I feel, I experience things. All right? Let's go to the next one. I want to do a little experiment again. I'm going to ask you to contemplate your thoughts. This is kind of mindfulness question. So sit back, relax, maybe even close your eyes for this one. And inside your own mind, address this question. If you could go anywhere, where would it be? Just ponder the question. Think deeply about it. Try and keep focused. Where would you go? What would you do? Think. Now, because this is a webinar, we can't leave too much silence going on. But come back, I want you to do the next phase of it. I want you probably only had time for a few thoughts there. But could you go back to those thoughts and try to remember what order you put them in, or they came to you? What was the first thought that came in when I asked the question? Where did you go next? What was it after that? Think about that for a moment. And as you're thinking about the order of these points, think of what you felt as you were thinking about them. Did some of them amuse you? Did some of them intrigue you? Did some of them suggest, well, that's rather interesting, but a bit silly? What do you think of those thoughts now? Now I want you to do a third bit of analysis. I want you to think not about the thoughts that you are having, but about yourself as the person who has just been analysing your thoughts. Think about who it was, yourself, that you have this ability to now analyze the thoughts that you were thinking. So you're not just thinking the thoughts, you're not just being aware that you were thinking the thoughts, you're seeing yourself as being able to analyze how you receive and experience those thoughts. This is what is called higher order thinking. And I've just kind of mentioned three basic levels that can be analysed according to this. There's thinking the thoughts as an experience. Basically, you're just going with the thoughts. You're not thinking about the fact that you're thinking, you're just thinking the thoughts. Okay? It's an experience of those thoughts. But then the next level is remembering that you had the thoughts and thinking about the thoughts that you were thinking about. So that's a new thought. You've got this thought where you're thinking about those previous thoughts. And the third one is that you were thinking that I am the person thinking about the thoughts I am having about my thoughts. Now, what this actually indicates to us is something which is Jiva Goswami's second proposition, that I am the witness of the content of my mind and the actions of my body. So this meditation, this kind of mindfulness meditation of higher order thinking, is to help us separate ourselves as that person who experiences and who can analyze the subject matter of our thoughts. And so that we can understand that there is a distinction between me as the witness of the thoughts and the thoughts themselves. Me as the witness of the actions of my body and its senses and its activities. So that's Jiva Goswami's proposition number 2. Now, another little thought experiment for you. Again, I want you to cast your mind, this time into the past. Go back to your first day at school. Picture the scene. What were you doing? And what were you feeling? Were you happy, excited, or scared? And stay with that memory. That was you there, the person experiencing that event. You were the witness of your own experiences that day. So, come back to the present moment. The interesting thing is, a lot has changed since you're that first day at school, unless we've got some very, very young listeners to this webcast. But otherwise, over the years, your body and mind have changed. They've changed neurologically, biologically, physiologically, psychologically. But something hasn't changed. You're still the same witness of the experiences. You were there then, within that, say, 5-year-old body, experiencing your first day at school. You were going through all the emotions, all the perceptions, all the experiences. And you're here today listening to this webinar. So the you has not changed. But our brain has changed in many ways. Our body has changed, both biologically and physiologically. Psychologically, we are a very different person. We look at things differently. We have different interests and outlooks. But the person who is experiencing stuff hasn't changed. So this is an indication that I am the same person experiencing my life throughout my life. Jiva Goswami's third proposition. I remain the same unchanging witness throughout my life. I'm not only the witness to my experiences now, but I have always been this same witness throughout my life. So, therefore, I as the conscious person must be distinct from my body and mind. Now, some people say, oh, no, when you access memories, it's a recall and you're experiencing the recall for the first time in the here and now. That's true. And the Vedas explain that that's actually what is happening. However, there's a big difference between opening a memory file where you identify and know that I was there then, and opening a file, say, on a computer or in a filing cabinet, where you learn about something and have no identification that I was there at the time. So there's a big difference. There's a fourth idea, and that is that we don't want to suffer. Now, some people like to feel pain as an experience, otherwise, they may help them feel alive or feel that they're making an effort. If there's no burn in the pain, then there's no gain. So suffering is different to pain. Pain short-lived, it passes, but suffering entails we're affected and often debilitated from some continuous mental or physical suffering. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't learn or grow from bad situations, but still, pain and suffering seem foreign to us. We would prefer to be without it. I know some people say, well, you need pain in order to experience pleasure. But no one plans their day like that, do they? You don't get up in the morning and think, I want one disaster to happen to me after another, because when I go out this evening to a party, I'll feel really cheerful and happy. We don't think like that. We'd rather the day goes swimmingly, so when we go out, we're in a great mood. Now, I think that the difficulty and the kind of strange relationship that often we have in modern society to pain is a symptom of a society that has not found how to really find inner peace, satisfaction and fulfillment, real pleasure. But Jiva Goswami is not in that mode. His point is that when you're in touch with your actual self, you realize and experience what pleasure or bliss really feels like. And you recognize that there is a difference between what I want and what I aspire to in terms of pleasure and what I get from my material kind of life within this body. Srila Prabhupada, in that particular purport, also alludes to this. And he says, the spiritual quality of the seer, i.e. the individual witness, the soul, is manifest in our dissatisfaction with the limited state of materially conditioned existence. That's the difference between spirit and matter. And Jiva Goswami then phrases it, that I am fundamentally different from my material body because I believe I exist for pleasure, and the body seems to be the seat of suffering. So that's the fourth proposition. So looking at these in total, we start with the knowledge that I exist. Then I am a conscious being. I see, I feel, I experience. I am the I, the conscious self, the observer, the witness, the subject of my experiences. And I am the same witness, the same conscious self throughout my life. I want fulfillment and blissful pleasure. So that's the summary of the intuitions I can derive for myself. And by doing this, we're a type of consciousness explorer, even you could say a consciousness scientist. We're getting to grips with the one conscious entity that we have most familiarity with, ourselves. It's the only place that we can start. We cannot be absolutely sure how everyone else experiences their existence, but we can know how I experience mine. And if there's going to be any theory on consciousness, it better account for what I feel, what I experience, what I know to be true about myself. And that is the problem with many of the philosophies that we're going to be looking at, which which purport to explain consciousness. They don't match what we individually know to be true. Therefore, they cannot be complete or valid. Now, John Searle, a famous philosopher from America, summed up the idea of consciousness. And he phrased it like this: the essential trait of consciousness that we need to explain is unified qualitative subjectivity. Now, that phrase, unified qualitative subjectivity, I'm sure is coming across as a mouthful and probably doesn't mean an awful lot to you. But it's smart and it needs to be unpacked. So, It's not a definition of consciousness, but the way it's phrased is that if we're going to explain something called consciousness, then we better make sure it includes unified qualitative subjectivity. Now, as it happens, John Searle himself broke his own rule when he makes his conclusions, and he's still lecturing around the place. And he doesn't actually fulfill this in his own theories of consciousness. But I would recommend it to you that these 3 words actually sum up exactly what is needed in an explanation of consciousness. So let's look at them individually. Subjectivity. Well, that means being the I, the subject having experience. It refers to the person who is the experiencer, the witness, the seer, in the words that Prabhupada and Jiva Goswami use. The person who knows he exists. And when we say subjectivity, we're using subject in the sense as in grammar, that there is the subject of a sentence. I am the subject of the sentence. I see the table, for example. The next word is unified, unchanging, singular. It's complete. So the idea is that we are one complete unit of consciousness. We are the singular. We're just the only unit of consciousness that I am. There may be other units of consciousness in other bodies, but I am the singular conscious being in my body. And I'm unchanging. I'm the persistently unified entity within this body. I don't change from my childhood to my youth to my old age, as the Gita says. That is a brilliant analysis of how consciousness and the experience of consciousness doesn't change. I remain the same person. Now, some people say, well, what about schizophrenia? However, even in schizophrenia, there is one conscious entity, but that individual entity is troubled because they're getting the input from 2 or more kind of voices within the mind. So that's an issue which we will explain how that happens, but it actually confirms that there is one singular person, but who is having trouble because he's been given 2 different messages by our mind, and that is really kind of very difficult. Okay, then the third question, qualitative. Now this is an interesting one. Now, the other principles arise from our intuition and personal analysis, so does this word qualitative. But this is the one aspect that actually can be explored much more empirically via neuroscience and psychological experiments. And actually, whereas the other 4 statements that we quoted from Jiva Goswami actually are very powerful arguments for the nature of consciousness, establishing ourselves as different from the mind and the body. Qualia are the killer evidence. And therefore, this is one of the most important words that you might ever come across. Qualia. Now, I'd like a little poll that you can do on the Facebook page if you're on that. And that is, just answer, have you heard of this word before? I'd like to answer it honestly, and if you didn't, please do answer, because I give this talk to many universities, and very, very few individuals know this term qualia. And actually, it is the most important word in this whole discussion on consciousness. It is, as I said, the killer evidence that proves that consciousness cannot be reduced and explained by anything that the brain can do. Consciousness is a completely different function and aspect of reality than anything we can find within physics. Now, it's such a big topic that we're going to leave it and make it part of next week's presentation. So next week we're dedicating entirely to qualia, the hard problem. So that'll be the 3rd lecture of this. And I hope that, actually, if anyone's got any questions at this point, please take a moment to put them on now, because there's a delay in when they get fed through to us. But while you're doing that, I just want to explain that next week we'll talk about qualia, and then after that we look at brain models, what the brain can do and what it can't do. And I will explain how the brain cannot deal with issues such as qualia, nor any of the other statements and propositions that we have come across this evening. And then later on we debunk physicalist theories, we look at the definition of the ATMA and give direct evidence for it, and then we finish with explaining many of its importance, not only its significance for us individually, but also the applications that arise from understanding that consciousness is not produced from the brain. Now, these 8 lectures that we're doing as part 1 are the start of the course. There will be a part 2 which will explore matter and reality, and particularly this will look at the nature of the interaction between consciousness and the physical world, both in terms of our brain and body, but also outside reality. And part 3 will deal with life, its origins and proliferation. And part 4, we will look at the universe, its origin, development, and even what is beyond that. Now, at this stage, I'd like to kind of move to our Q&A, and I'm assisted by one of our devotees in Cardiff, who is kind of like my producer, and he has been looking at the web page on Facebook and taking all your questions. So Mantri, can I ask you to come in on this, and if there are any questions that we can address in the minutes that are left to us? Sorry, you're coming very faint. Facebook and taking all your questions. So Mantri, can I ask you to come in on this, and if there are any questions that we can address in the minutes that are left to us?
Can you hear me?
Sorry, you're coming back. Taking all your questions. So Mantri, we're picking up your the feed from you. Are there any questions that we can address in the minutes of the lecture?
Can you hear me?
Sorry, you're coming back. Okay, Mantri, I can hear you. Mantri, is there any questions?
Celine had one question where she asked how general anesthesia affects consciousness and the soul, and how we're able to explain this to medical professionals presenting Vedic wisdom.
Yeah, an important discussion. In order to really understand what affects our states of consciousness, and anesthesia is something that changes what we are experiencing into something that we don't seem to be experiencing. Now, it's a complex issue, and I would like to deal with that particular topic when we're able to show you the physics of how consciousness interacts through the mind with the physical body. It is explained, and we've got a very interesting model for that. But just because we can experience nothing as we think we do within anesthesia doesn't mean that our consciousness, our ability to be conscious, is extinguished. Because the interesting aspect is how we experience. Mantri, we have to turn. I'm sorry. We've got the feed coming through from Cardiff, which isn't good. We have to appreciate that there is a difference between being conscious and what we are conscious of. Vedanta gives a very interesting example related to deep sleep. It says deep sleep is one state of consciousness. Others are dreaming, others are awakening. Those are three basic ones, and there are maybe others. And the interesting point it makes is that the reason that you're actually conscious during deep sleep, but because you are not being fed any experience of the world through your senses in that state, you have nothing to attach a memory to. And therefore, when you wake up, you do feel, oh, I had a good night's sleep. But you will not remember any aspect of your deep sleep because there was nothing for you to remember happening. But the idea is that even the consciousness continues even when you feel that there is nothing that you are experiencing. And the same is true within anesthesia. And we know that there are, and we will mention certain examples of when people are under anesthetics, they can wake up and be fully conscious, but their body is frozen. So I hope that deals with that question. I see Andres has asked the question that is the issue of existence tautological, because we're tying consciousness to existence. And in one sense, yes, we are tying them together. And I don't think that invalidates the principle that there is something to be explored and explained here. Rather, it's kind of, if our sense of existence is tied to the fact that I am conscious, yes, that's one sense that's a unified concept, and that's what needs to be explained. So don't try and produce theories which dodge the reality that I am conscious of my own existence. I'm looking to see. I see there's a question, is there any empirical evidence? Yes, but we'll come to that in the section in a couple of times, in a couple of lectures. And how can one explain consciousness if we're assuming it is primary? From a logical perspective, saying that it is primary means that it's an axiom, therefore taken as a given, hence not to be derived. In one sense, I agree with that statement. We are going to present consciousness as axiomatic truth, but just because you claim something to be an axiom, it can't be fanciful. We've got to show that it has utility, that from that axiom, everything else can be explained and understood. That's the power of an axiom, that it has explanatory power. So I hope that we'll be able to develop that as we go along. Now, I see that I've now reached what would be the end of our session today, but I have one more question for you. And Mantri in Cardiff has put this on the Facebook poll. We had an idea that rather than do the question and answer with this method from Facebook, which for the second week has not failed, has not achieved our aspirations because of the technology, we were wondering if at this point after the talk we might ask you then to participate in a Zoom call where we can actually talk about this, not just for a few minutes, but it may be extended up to 7 o'clock, so for the full hour. And what I'd like to know is this of something that is of interest to you. So please take a moment to find that poll wherever it is on the Facebook page and let us know your thoughts, whether you think it's a good idea that instead of this type of Q&A, we do a Zoom call where there can be better interaction between us all. And with that, I think we need to conclude for today. Again, thank you very much for your attendance. Please know that you'll find on the web page, on the Facebook page, that there are some notes on qualia that you can read for next week. It's just a very simple kind of introduction to the concept. And there will also be the slides from this talk also available if that's of interest to you. But again, thank you very much for all your participation, and I look forward to seeing you at the same time next week for the ATMA Paradigm webinar 1.3, all about qualia. Thank you. Good night. Hare Krishna.